Good evening. My name is Jennifer Wilkes, and I'm Associate Director of the Warfield Center. I'm so delighted that you all came out this evening, and I hope that you were as moved by this wonderful documentary as I am, am, and will continue to be. So I now have the pleasure of introducing four of my colleagues who are each going to speak about 5 minutes about the documentary, about their scholarly, intellectual, personal, artistic relationship to Morrison's work. And then we're going to open the floor up for discussion because we'd love to continue in that theme of connection, right, that Morrison invited us into at the end of the film. So let me introduce my colleagues, and again, they're going to each speak for up to 5 minutes, and then we'll proceed to discussion. And you may have noticed that the Moody College's wonderful staff have equipped us here with everything that we need for this discussion. So first, I'd like to introduce Dr. Helena Woodard, who specializes in 18th century British literature, early Black Atlantic writings, and African American literature. She is a winner of the Friar Centennial Teaching Fellowship Award, the African American Diaspora Department Teaching Award, and the President's Associates Teaching Award. She has taught the novels of Toni Morrison here at UT Austin as a graduate course, an honors course, and a single author course in the Department of English for more than 20 years. Woodard has published articles that include The Two Marys, Prince and Shelley, on the textual meeting ground of race, gender, and genre, and Margaret Garner and Appomattox, Performing Slavery, Rewriting Opera. And as we heard earlier this evening, she's the author of a newly released book titled Slave Sites on Display, Reflecting Slavery's Legacy Through Contemporary Flash Moments, just published by the University Press of Mississippi. We also have the pleasure of being joined by Dr. Lisa B. Thompson, who's an award-winning artist, scholar, and teacher whose work has been produced across the United States and internationally. The professor of African and African Diaspora Studies at the University of Texas at Austin is also affiliate faculty in English, theater and dance, women and gender studies, and the Warfield Center for African and African American Studies, where she served as associate director from 2013 to 2015. Thompson's plays include Single Black Female, Underground, Monroe, and The Monologues, which just closed at the Vortex Rep. I hope you had the chance to see it. If not, keep your eyes out for the next Thompson production. Her creative work has been published in contemporary plays by African American women, 10 complete works, and Catch the Fire, a cross-generational anthology of contemporary African American poetry. Thompson's cultural criticism includes her book, Beyond the Black Lady, Sexuality and the New African American Middle Class. We'll also be joined by Dr. Stephen Marshall, who is a political theorist who teaches Black political thought in the Department of African and African Diaspora Studies and the Department of American Studies here at UT. His research interests include the history of political philosophy, U.S. political development, politics of the Black diaspora, and Black political thought. He is the author of The City on the Hill from Below, a study of the Black prophetic tradition of political theory, and he is currently working on, and I cannot wait to read, a book project on the political vision of Toni Morrison. And then we also have the pleasure of being joined by Yake Smith, who's known for his unflinching and voracious style of storytelling, and who is a rising voice in independent cinema, and, as if that were not enough, an associate professor of film, as well as interim associate dean of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the Moody College of Communication. His films have received worldwide acclaim, screening, and winning awards at over 90 film festivals. His short, Katrina's Son, screened at over 40 film festivals and won 14 awards. The film was also eligible for the 2012 Academy Award in Short Filmmaking. His debut feature, Wolf, premiered at the South by Southwest Film Festival and has gone on to screen and win awards at festivals across North America. The film is now available for download via several video-on-demand outlets. His short film, Dawn, made its television premiere on HBO in February of 2015 and was also streamed as part of Issa Rae's short film Sunday series on her YouTube channel. And its latest film, Heavenly, premiered at the American Black Film Festival and was awarded Audience Choice Honors at the 2019 Fort Worth Indie Film Showcase. So please join me in welcoming these wonderful members of the UT Austin community to the stage, and we'll have our discussion of the film. Dr. Marshall,
I'll
ask you if you'll start.
Sure.
Do you mind starting, please, and we can just work our way down.
Absolutely. First of all, it's an honor and a pleasure to be here tonight. I feel particularly fortunate to be able to talk a little bit about what Toni Morrison has meant to me, both as a scholar and as a person, as a black man trying to make it in the world, trying to raise a child and be a husband. But I thought I might really say a little bit about what it was like when I heard that she had passed away. It's August 5th. I was in Los Angeles, California, when I received the news that she had passed. And I remember feeling a profound sense of loneliness. This sense that this great moral and intellectual source had left the world. I felt similar to the way that I felt when Aretha Franklin passed, and felt this sense that there are fewer and fewer figures of that stature among us. And it made me reflect on some of the words that were mentioned by our colleague Farrah Griffin when she described how Morrison saw herself as writing about black people who she took to be a world historic people. For me personally, that has meant seeing figures who are recognizable to me personally, figures who I've encountered in my own life through my extended family, and figures I've heard about, that Morrison was able to take these kinds of persons and tell stories about their lives that were able to cast them in this grand, epic significance. I could say more about what her work has meant to me as a scholar. My first work only scratched the surface. This later project I actually have talked about before and have only recently discovered that it's a project that is centrally about Toni Morrison's political thought. I want to say just a couple of things about the last couple of passages that I read by Toni Morrison that for me represent not simply beautiful passages, but have constituted profound truths about what it has meant for me to live in the world. And there's one story in particular that I want to share with you. It's from the novel Paradise. And it involves, have I gone on for more than 5 minutes, by the way?
You have about 2 minutes.
I have 2 minutes, great, thank you, okay. So it's it's this novel Paradise, and it's this this portion of the novel that describes this character Pat Best, who is both a kind of central player within this black community that's described in the novel, but also kind of the historian of this community. And she's talking about, or she's reflecting on how she's raised her child. And there's this beautiful formulation where Morrison talks about parenting as this process that at moments fosters this kind of indistinction between protecting your child and sacrificing your child. Do you know that passage I'm talking about?
Yeah. From Paradise.
Yeah. And it was, for me, this really profound reflection on what it's like to raise a black child in America. And it spoke to certain questions I have about my own shortcomings as a parent. It spoke to that in a way that was really moving. And there are many other passages that are really personal, but her work has just been more than a text. It's been a moral resource. Thanks.
Thank you.
Moral resource, good word. Okay. Wow. I had finished teaching the novels of Toni Morrison when the movie came out and invited the class to see it. Most students did get a chance to see the film. And yet, throughout the session, I kept feeling this sort of a prophetic notion that she wasn't well. And I told my students, we're very fortunate to have had her as a living iconic author because she can tell us what she thinks and feels about her works, her writings. But I fear she might not be with us very long. And but not knowing any specifics, I did know that she was wheelchair bound and had problems with her breathing, and talked about it the last time I saw her, which was in New York at the meeting of the Toni Morrison Society and at the Schomburg Center, and she talked about her health. At any rate, it was still a stunner when a colleague called me who won 2 books in a row on the novels of Toni Morrison, one about the African cosmology in Morrison's fiction and the other about a collection of essays on the Margaret Garner opera, for which my essay was one of those that Dr. Wilkes referred to in the introduction. And she told me, have you heard Toni Morrison has passed? I was stone silent and have still not figured out how to react. But for today's purpose, I want to talk about Toni Morrison as a public intellectual, because that great voice that has been silenced was a prophetic vision of Americana in all its flaws, if you will, talking about issues regarding race, especially slavery, its past, that is considered still almost taboo to talk about. But I'll start by referencing Morrison's eulogy for James Baldwin when he passed away in 1987, again around the time of the publication of her book, and the prize, not the Nobel, the original, the literary prize that was cited by the African American intellectuals. Jimmy, she said in the eulogy, you crowned us, and yet it was Baldwin who crowned Toni Morrison as the next premier black intellectual, his successor. This is what she said, though, not seeing his mantle, accepting of his mantle, as an anointing, but as a challenge. Quote, I never heard a single command from you, yet the demands you made on me, the challenges you issued to me, were nevertheless unmistakable, even if unenforced, that I work and think at the top of my form, that I stand on moral ground, but know that ground must be shored up by mercy, that the world is before me, and I need not take it or leave it as it was when I came in. End of quote from the Eulogy. And in a quick aside, more recently, it was Toni Morrison who passed that mantle on to Ta-Nehisi Coates, author of Between the World and Me, whose publisher, through him, requested a commentary after sending her a galley of the book, not thinking, won't hear anything back. And this is what she wrote in an email sent through her agent. Quote, I've been wondering who might fill the intellectual void that plagued me after James Baldwin died. Clearly, it is Ta-Nehisi Coates, end quote. And his words were, man, his reaction to getting that anointing. But again, I believe that in her humbleness, she simply disregarded her own contributions to that ideology as Black public intellectuals. So I want to point out some examples I've pulled from events and from her books. Let's start for quick instance with The Bluest Eye and God Help the Child, 1970 and I think so 2014, respectively. Those books bookend her current known writings because there is a novel, don't yet know how far along it is. But the two books that bookend her career at this point are books about children, about the treatment of children, the abuse of children, the value of children, and that I think is not in any way accidental. And so the book we've already talked about, heard from the film Bluest Eye, has been banned, still is in some school settings and libraries. But it was written before it was considered acceptable, if you will, to talk publicly about childhood sexual abuse, predatory behaviors, etc. She famously said on an Oprah Winfrey Show segment, when a child walks into a room, your eyes should light up. She also talked about working on a line for a full day, off and on, and holding her youngest son, on her lap, as she wrote. And suddenly he spit up on the line and obliterated it. It had taken her the whole day to write. And she smiled, she laughed, and she said, children don't care if you're a writer, you're famous, who you are. They need milk. They want to be fed, and so forth. So just this really special place in her heart for children. Another example, many of you probably know that it was Toni Morrison who designated former President Bill Clinton as America's first Black president. And until America's authentic Black president was elected, Barack Obama. Connected with both those, what you may not know, though, is that media and public immediately construed that designation based on Bill Clinton's comfort, if you will, with having Black friends, had Black secretary in the White House, Vernon Jordan, a pal, and played the saxophone, etc. Grew up single parent home, working class, Arkansas, etc. But it wasn't what she meant. And more recently, she said, what I meant was that Bill Clinton as president, was treated so badly by his congressional peers. And as you well know, leading all the way up to the impeachment, that you would have thought that he was a Black person. And of course, when President Barack Obama was elected, we saw how he was treated, and especially on Fox News, for goodness sake, and other media sources, and even among people on the right, and who made caricatures out of him and of Michelle Obama. I also raised that example because, again, prophecy. Morrison, upon his request, wrote an endorsement, a letter of endorsement for Barack Obama's presidency. It was the first time she had ever endorsed a candidate publicly. But for time's sake, I won't read. You can find that letter online. New York Times copied it. And basically, she said he was the right person, gifted with wisdom and knowledge, integrity, the right person at the right time to be elected. But don't get it wrong. She never saw him as the post-racial president, or the president signifying a post-racial era. And so we saw what happened in his presidency. And again, Morrison's prophecies rose not only through his presidency, but through his successor. So, yes. Lastly, when Morrison wrote Sula, which referenced in the film, 1973, she said in an interview with Bill Moyers about a character who was a World War I veteran, black veteran, who was drug addicted and suffered from PTSD. Before that was a word, it was called shell shock back in the day. And she said in that interview, there ought to be a rehabilitation center on every street corner. Decades before the opioid crisis. Oh my gosh. So now we're not talking about imprisonment, are we? Because the opioid crisis affects disproportionately young rural white people and young in rural America. When she talked about the black character, and I'll close on this, from the novel Sula, the image of a drug-addicted person was urban-based, black, strung out on crack or heroin, and eventually it led to this mass incarceration disproportionately for people addicted to crack cocaine as opposed to powder cocaine, mostly the Wall Street addicts, right? And so there again, prophecy that I thought, on every street corner, yes, that there is, as Billie Holiday said before she passed away with drug addiction, that people on drugs are ill and should not be punished through incarceration. And now it seems that the nation is coming to grips with that very idea. Light bulb moment, okay? Let's treat these people who are addicted to opioid medication and so forth. So just take heart that Toni Morrison's voice, her writings, her interviews, her speeches, immortalize her. And so she will always be with us. And that gives me some comfort. But when I go to the next Toni Morrison Society meeting, it will be difficult. I know that because I would see her at those meetings and of course won't again. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So when I think of Toni Morrison, there are so many words that come to mind. When I was in high school, one of the first novels that we actually read was Beloved. I was 17 and they were filming the movie. And so our English teacher decided, hey, we're going to go see this film, so we're going to read the novel, and then we're going to go watch the film. And it was interesting because my English teacher was a little white lady who had been an actress back in the 50s and 60s. And so she would sit in front of us every day and she would read from these novels. and she would read Beloved. And it came to life so vividly through the way in which she read it, but I remember just thinking of the language and the way that it was written, and the ways in which Toni Morrison could, my God, out of one sentence, create so much meaning, and create so much emotional resonance that you would literally like sit on that sentence and digest it over and over and over again. And every time you would read it, something new would come to you, some new meaning would come to you. But as I was sitting in my office earlier thinking about what I wanted to say about Toni Morrison, I started thinking about all of these words about what was she, right? And griot came up, prophet came up, oracle came up, sage came up, and truth bearer came up. But above all of those, the one thing that came to me, and I'm thinking back to my teacher, and I'm thinking that Toni Morrison is a mirror. And I say she's a mirror who showed us, and I say us, black people, who we were. A mirror who, as President Barack Obama famously proclaimed when honoring her with the Presidential Medal of Freedom, taught us how to be. Her narratives rewrote our existence, gave us back our agency. She centered us, literally centered us in narratives where we had always existed on the periphery, narratives that had always rendered us against the lens of whiteness, where we had always existed in a white imagination of who we were, based on assumptions, birthed from stereotypes, told from the perspectives of those who had no intimate knowledge of our fears, our loves, our desires, our hopes, our dreams. Through small passages, she reminded us that above everything, we had a duty to practice love. Love of our people, love of ourselves, because that love would allow us to bear it even when it felt unbearable, to overcome it when overcoming it felt impossible. Through simple passages like Paul D says to Setha, you are your best thing, right? She offered our humanity back to us, not as something to be studied or discovered, but something to be celebrated, to be praised, to be rendered with full dimension, and for us to bask in the sun of that dimension. She said, and we heard in the documentary, if we could just surrender to the air, we could ride it. And surrender to her air, we did. And we rode it, and we lived in it, and we breathed in every word of it. James Baldwin once said, all art is a kind of confession, more or less oblique. All artists, if they are to survive, are forced at last to tell the whole truth, to vomit the anguish up. And out of that passage, words popped to me: confession, the whole story, vomit, anguish, forced up. Not Toni Morrison's words, but for me, seemingly her mission. To tell the truth no matter how uncomfortable it was. To tell the whole story no matter how complicated and complex it may be. To offer back a reflection of the world to itself in all its ugliness and beauty, in all its horror and its wonder. Now, though she's gone from us, her words will never leave us. As a matter of fact, I dare to say that because she's gone from us, her words will never leave us. They are forever planted inside of us, moving us to the action of repairing ourselves, to having faith in ourselves, to being empathetic toward those that we don't understand, to bearing witness, and ultimately telling the truth about what it is that we witness. In her Nobel Prize lecture, she said, when language dies out of carelessness, disuse, indifference, and absence of esteem, all users and makers are accountable for its demise. And I believe that this is her charge to us, to keep language alive, to use language to speak for those who can't speak for themselves, to use language to invite others into worlds that they would not otherwise visit, and ultimately to use language to destroy the shackles of a world that is imprisoned by a sometimes careless, perverted, and useless rendering of the written and the spoken word. Toni Morrison.
Thank you, Yake.
I want to thank the Warfield Center and the Moody School for allowing us to see this film, because it came to Austin very quickly and left very quickly, and it came back after she passed away. And I watched it, but I didn't see any of it because I cried the entire time, because it was a few days after she passed away. And I was really trying to find a space to honor this fallen giant. And in Austin, there aren't a lot of spaces for black people to do that kind of mourning in public. So I was thinking about that, and so this gives us a chance to do that. I also wanted to kind of highlight some of the things. I love what my colleagues have said, but I want to highlight some things that are kind of underrepresented or discussed. I also teach a course on Toni Morrison. I've been teaching it since I started being a professor. I remember I had to fight to get that course at my two former universities, and there's like, a whole course on her, huh? What, the whole semester? And then Nobel Prize happened, and it was like, okay. And since I came here, because I know I come to someone else's house, you always want to ask permission, so I teach a course on Toni Morrison and August Wilson, because my colleague teaches Toni Morrison course, has home training. And they do go really well together. So I want to think about the theatricality of Toni Morrison. She's one of the few writers who reads their work with such amazing performative value that I own all of her audiobooks. And I urge you to do that, because it is a whole other experience. If you've heard Langston Hughes read his work, compare and contrast. You know, love Langston Hughes, but no. But Toni Morrison reads her work, and you understand everything. And we've lost one of the greatest, I think, performers of their own work. I also think that she taught us a couple things. Yes, she's definitely a friend of our minds, all of our minds, and in a way in which she invites us to grow up. There's a great line from jazz that friends of mine, Dwight McBride, who was here, who was one of her former, actually worked on jazz with her as a student at Princeton. We always look at each other and go, where are the grown folks at? Is it us? And with her passing, the passing of people like Aretha Franklin and others, it becomes incumbent upon us to realize we are the grown folks now, to do the work. And what she invites us to do, too, is to stand in all the glory and grandness of your genius and your blackness, that they are not mutually exclusive, and that she decided to be the editor, to be which not mentioned in the film, is the teacher, which she taught many, many people, both artists and scholars, and to be the artist. And the thing about what she did for artists, scholars, is just allow us to say we're all those things. And I'm glad she acknowledged the way in which we have to, first for black women, to hide that. I did the same thing. I'm like, oh, I'm a playwright on the side. I used to joke around until now the fifth play is coming. It's like, not on the side, right? You know, it's straight, no chaser. So she gave us that. And one thing she gave for me, I remember taking my mother to see her read, and she got to in San Francisco. I was in grad school, and she came to the dais, and she had to basically get someone else to help her lift her arm up for that ring she had, that rock of diamond. And I thought, wow, I didn't understand diamonds until I saw that ring. I said, I'm blinded. But thought about what it means to be a black woman fully in her body and to adorn herself, and how she enjoyed that pleasure of cooking for her friends, baking for her friends, dancing. It's a picture circulating around social media right now of her dancing, Studio 54 perhaps, no bra on, yes. Right, and what that means, what it really, really means. So that's one thing I wanted to underscore. The other is this idea of how much being a black single mother, the thing you're supposed to be ashamed of, shaped her practice as a writer, right? Leaving the door open for her sons, but also the fact that she got up at 5 in the morning. Which was not mentioned in here. She also used to, for fun, read the New York Times with a pencil and copy edit it. And I used to tell my students when I was teaching them to write, I said, Toni Morrison does all kinds of things with language because she knows all the rules. You can't break them unless you know them well. So she was, I think it's important for us to talk about her craft, too. Just amazing with that. And I just feel somewhat sorry for the generations to come that won't be walking the earth at the same time that she is. And that she also dared to engage in every genre. the playwriting as well, right? No one can see the play, right? She hid it. Maybe we'll get access to it now. But also writing for classical music and seeing the Margaret Gunner opera. I remember that's when I saw her, and just amazing to be able to you let your curiosity move you through the work and the challenges, and what an honor it's been to be able to read all of her books. And I didn't want to hear about how he was in high school when Beloved came out. You could have kept that to yourself. To yourself. Some things are private. I know. I'm like, thank you, Yake. We need to. That's so cute. And the last thing is about age, and aging and the black body. First of all, that I tell my students this, in class this week, don't rush to be the hot thing writing under 30. She's first published at 39 years old, like August Wilson, first play. There's not a rush. Develop the work. Trust the work. Listen, learn, develop yourself. And that we should think more differently about aging. I'm joking here, but really about aging and what it means to age and be in the body. And that part of the job of being alive is to eventually to die, right? And that's a natural process. And we need to move to a place where we are honoring that in a different way. I just wanted to kind of mark that. And that, what I loved about seeing the film was seeing her her body in different parts of her life as a black woman. Again, being disregarded as black and female is one thing, but you add old to it, it's a whole other thing. So that's the next piece I'm going to be working on, is about the aging black female body and what that means. And I'm so glad to see her being glorious and adoring herself throughout all that. And so if you can afford some, get yourself some diamonds. All right.
Thank you. So thank you to all of our panelists. Because I'm mindful of the time, and I know that we're all busy people, and also because this wealth of brilliant minds is here at UT Austin, and you can find them to continue the conversation after tonight. I'm going to ask that we have 2 questions and then wrap up for the evening. But again, I hope that this is an ongoing conversation in our classrooms, on the East Mall, on the South Mall, throughout Austin, and as we move, into our respective worlds as well as our collective world here today. So 2 questions from the audience before we leave. Questions, comments? We'd be happy to take them.
I'm really grateful that y'all did this. To echo what Lisa said, I wanted to see the film, and like you said, it was here, it was gone. So I was really grateful to see this at my alma mater, and to be able to come back and learn more about her, to hear her laughter and her voice, and that knowledge. It was inspiring, and that the analogy of the mirror, you're right, and how she voiced that. So it's like I need to read all her books, because I've read a few of her books, and I'm going to find the audiobooks as well, so I'm able to continue to hear her voice. And it goes beyond, like you said, she's going to go on forever, because she wrote her words and thoughts down, and she reflected on our people and the resiliency of our people. And so I appreciate this whole experience, and I'm really grateful to be here. And thank y'all. Thank the panelists as well.
Thank you for coming.
Okay. Sorry. I just wanted to amend my earlier comment because I see 2 hands. So we're going to have 3 questions and/or comments. So why don't we start here, and then we'll wrap with Badur.
I'm just feeling really moved. I just recently arrived from Brazil, and in my whole life I've had 2 black teachers, and one of them was in 5th grade, and she read Os Olhos Mais Azuis, The Bluest Eyes in Portuguese. And I'm just here so moved, to be here at this moment where there's still public mourning around her. And I just wanted to share a feeling and a listening, right? By, issue the messenger. Because I was in Rio in the day of the assassination of Marielle Franco, whom, and in the morning, the public morning we had, at the time I heard this amazing dancer, Aline Valentin, sharing a word of understanding from Candomblé, saying, there is sorrow, but we need to live this experience from our own cosmogony. And in our African cosmogony, there is no separation. And the moment of passage is the moment of carrying the message. So, and for that we say, for young ancestors like her, or the aging ancestors, like the young ancestors like Marielle Franco, is the old ancestors as Toni Morrison, we say Mojuba. It goes, take the word and circulate it between the worlds, which is what is always been doing. So I just wanted to share the word of Mojuba to both of them, and so pleased to be here tonight. And thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's going to be hard to talk after hearing that. So there are two things. There are very few, and this is what I'm saying is part of the reason why I wish there were some younger Black women in the documentary, because I come from a generation of people who our whole lives we have had Toni Morrison from the very beginning. And there are very few feelings than that feeling of being a Black girl, and reading The Bluest Eye, and like the devastation that comes from that, especially as a Black girl. And Steve, you mentioned the loneliness, and I feel very much, that loneliness, because she's someone who was so important, and when you lose someone like that, it's very much like, and not to kind of parentify someone I don't know, but like, almost like when someone loses like an elder or a parent, and then you say, well, what do I do now? Like it's a very strange feeling. So I think watching that film helped with all of that very much. And the second thing I wanted to actually pose to the panel, and I'll stop like crying and all that, is in my first year of graduate school, I traveled to Barbados to help archive the papers of George Lamming, who is a novelist. And in his papers, we found a copy of her Nobel Prize speech that she had sent to George Lamming for feedback. And we asked him, well, did you know Toni Morrison? He's like, well, like I obviously had read her works, she had read my works, and we respect each other deeply, and that's why she sent it to me. And then he said, but you should know, Toni Morrison not only knew, but read every Black author from here to the Himalayas. Didn't matter where. And so that gave me a new appreciation for her work, because I had very much seen her as someone unseating, the great American novelist of the 20th centuries, that she became the new standard for the American novel. And I had dismissed in doing that the very kind of hemispheric nature of Black life that she was dealing with. And she showed that there was a way to be very particular about the experience you're writing to, but also have underneath it like this wealth, right, of Black life that was so vast and so global and so not what we would assume, to be her kind of well that she taps from. So I was wondering, Steve, in your work, and Lisa, and everyone in the works that you've done around Toni Morrison, what has it been like for you to encounter the way that Black life kind of spans the whole world? Not just in her sources, but even in the kind of unwritten aspect.
This is actually a great question. Thanks for the question, Bador. So recently, reading Paradise, I discovered, this is the third time I've read this novel. The first time I read it, I couldn't stand it. And then the second time I read it, I thought it was about my uncles. And then the third time I read it, and this is going to sound crazy, but I'm convinced that this is right. But the third time I read it, I'm convinced that Toni Morrison is reading Xenophon, Plato, and Plutarch. And that ultimately Paradise is a meditation on kind of democracy and patriarchy. So there's a profound political theory that's coming out of there. And, you know, this emerges out of this kind of careful engagement with, you know, quotidian Black life. So this isn't really an example of what you're asking me, how she, you know, starts with the particular and gets to the hemispheric, but it's the way in which her reading is so vast and her sensitivities so capacious that she's able to see things in Black life that connect up with these larger hemispheric realities. But I think she's also able to kind of seize very particular perennial problematics and questions and to answer them in light of Black life. And I think that that's what's really exciting about her work.
I'll just say quickly, you know, one of my favorite parts, many parts of this documentary is Walter Mosley's assertion that Toni Morrison's language is both, or her work is both Shakespearean and pedestrian. And so Steve's comments took me back to that. And the work that comes to mind in response to your question for me is Tar Baby. So I'm someone who works on African American and Francophone Caribbean literature, and in that novel, we see African Americans in the Francophone Caribbean. There's a meditation on Du Bois because we have an actual Philadelphia Negro of the book by this, you know, like the book from the same name in Sydney, and so she has that vast and deep repertoire or well of knowledge, I think, in art that she draws from, but she's always, in my sense, always attentive to the nuances, right, and to the differences within families. If we think about Song of Solomon, you know, a number of works, within communities, and then, you know, we can just move out from there. So, so those are some things that come to mind for me.
She was such an artist of language. Remember the anecdote about, it was true, but I anecdotally referenced the child spitting up on a line that took her all day to write. Well, when I first learned about the comment, I think it was in Bill Moyer's interview, she's talked about the down-to-earth nature of being a parent, a mother, and also being, of course, while being a writer. She did not negatively react in any way to the child spitting up on her line. But the other thought that I had was, she spent all day on a line, you know. But that is so Morrisonian. And so two quick comments I want to make around that I think might add to your questioning and comment about this sort of a both nurturing and global context for Black people's lives. For the language comment, she writes in the bluest eye that romantic love, let me get it right, and principal beauty and romantic love were the two most destructive words in the English language around the character of Pauline, that she makes that comment. But the other quick comment that you remember in the film, she talked about that, my dear, is reading. that she expressed dismay at the critical reaction to The Bluest Eye, because she saw through articles and publications, because again, the critical community writing and attending those conferences at Toni Morrison Society conferences, she felt that the readership missed the point that she wanted to make through that novel, and that she had failed, therefore, in her mission and in the way in which she wrote the novel. She took the blame on herself. And what it was, that it was the reader who felt sorry for Piccola, the young child who wanted blue eyes and ended up sinking into madness, was so brutalized in that story. And she says, though, the typical reader felt very sorry for Piccola, but she wanted the reader to feel complicit in what happened to her. And that we are our sisters and brothers' keepers, if you will. But that challenge to the reader to take part in the process of telling the story that she unfolds through her text is what has been so amazing to me and fruitful in the classroom, because I try and mimic that process in having students try and relate to Morrison on personal level. They have to write personal journals in their reactions to the stories, as well as the critical essays that are more formal regards for the work that she writes, the works that she writes. But again, this idea of a communal context, she says, for instance, the ancestor is foundational in African American history and literature, and wrote an article called The Ancestor as Foundation. And it's no accident that most of her novels employ a senior elderly figure. She talks about Pilate. In fact, in Song of Solomon, she's not an elder, but she is a sort of a sage figure in that story. So last, I'll say about that process of the reader engaging then with the stories that she writes. I think she said early in her career, and I think referenced it in the film, I wrote the novels that I wanted to read. And when she was criticized for not writing about white characters, when are you going to get to the real stories about, American life and so forth? That's how she explained her art form and her interest in the sort of panorama of the African American community, if you will.
Well, please join me in thanking our panelists, and let's also give a round of applause for Toni Morrison. Thank you for coming.